Welcome to the less fun session. No, it's an important one. Sex, why wait? This is important, and we want you to know that if you haven't waited, or maybe you've had sex before and now you are waiting with your future spouse, you're going to wait until after you're married. We celebrate that, but we also don't want any of you to feel any judgment whatsoever. Jesus didn't come to judge us and our mistakes. He brought grace, and we show you grace. There's no judgment here. So what we want to do in this session, and what this session will unpack with you, is biblically, why wait? So you can choose to wait at any time, by the way, right? God says, his grace is new every morning. But there's really beautiful, logical, biblical principles about the purpose of waiting. It's not meant to be just the buzz fun killer. That is not the design of anything in the Bible.
It's God's best.
It's God's best. And Pam and I have spent a lot of years talking about God's best because we've been through the worst, and we know what the best looks like. And that's what we strive for, not perfection, but just trying to live for God and make these small improvements over time. So again, go into the session. We don't want you to experience any shame, but we also want to recognize the beauty and design and why he asked us to wait. So why do you think God wanted us to wait? Why didn't God just say, hey, these two people love each other, let's jump into the sack?
Well, I think because of God's best, I think he was protecting us from heartache, ultimately. I mean, he knows how we're wired, how we establish such bonds from sexual relationships. And I think he knew that if we were just out and about doing whatever we wanted to, that it would eventually cause a lot of heartache and so much pain, and things that we never would have imagined would have come from a really fun experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one way I look at, when you look at sex and the fact that God, optimally said it's meant to be between a man and a woman for the rest of your lives, is it comes back to intimacy, right? And so I like to think of my individual human capacity for intimacy. If I were to fill it in a cup, this is the cup of intimacy I have for my entire life. And what the world would say is that this glass is limitless and that you can give a sip to anybody who wants it if it feels good. The reality is, because sex is a mystical, uniting thing, the Bible says to become one flesh. That's a really beautiful spiritual thing that exceeds the physical aspect of two people becoming one flesh. But if I pour out my intimacy to a lot of people before I get married, I'm left with less intimacy to bring to my marriage. So that means that while we have sex and we're united after marriage, the way the Bible describes, that my capacity for intimacy is diminished. Now, that does not mean that we can never get that glass refilled, because God is limitless. And if we go through the healing process and that journey, and in some cases it requires, therapy to really recover from giving away that intimacy that way. But it's just something we can avoid.
Right. So in this session, we are going to learn what the Bible has to say about purity, sexual immorality, and what's God's best.
Yeah, and we also cover this neat concept. God's calling us to save ourselves sexually. To every guy who is saving themselves right now, we know what a test that is. It tests our commitment to our spouse, and in some cases, it can really help generate a sense of safety, right, in your future spouse.
Well, if you can wait to have sex until you're married, it's just a good sense of trust for what's going to happen after you're married.
Yeah, Pam said it perfectly. So that's the neat thing, right? God gives us these commandments and laws. They're never meant to take away the joy in our life. They're actually meant to give us the joy fulfilled at full capacity, not diminished, not tarnished. So one of the most frequently asked questions for engaged couples saving themselves for marriage is, where's the line? And we cover this in this session. The reality is, I think the analogy we use is it's where's the line? The line's on a slope, and the slope's filled with soapy bubbles. So, but go through that section. We have answers, probably not as clear an answer as you're hoping for, but it's worthy of reading and praying on and spending time with God and your future spouse to think through those issues.
Because it's not easy, but it's worth it.
It's not easy, and it's absolutely worth it. So we're going to have you wrap up. You have a real simple exercise in the session. Just really spend some time praying over your future sex life, or your existing sex life that's going to be on pause until you get married. That's up to you and your spouse. But it's always a great way to end up with a prayer. So we'll see you at the next session.